أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وبه نستعين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. ربي أنتقنا بالهدى وألهمنا التقوى. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. I begin in the name of Allah, the most kind, the most merciful. It's due to that kindness and mercy that He gives us these opportunities where we gather to learn more about Him, Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. I have turned off the video just so that the internet connection and the bandwidth stays strong and that the PowerPoint screen comes a little bit larger. So the course that we're going to be participating in this week and next week, inshallah, aims to prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a really important discussion and subject, and I think these are things that we need to remind ourselves of as often as possible. If there are any issues with sounds or anything, please do send a chat message, and inshallah we will look into that. So before we get into the actual proving the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as such, there are a few questions that need to be, or a couple of questions that need to be answered. So the first discussion is that why do we need to prove the existence of God in the first place? The material for this discussion this week and next week are taken primarily from three sources, and as we quote the authors and the ulama of these courses, you'll see the titles of the book, or we'll mention them once again. But the three books that we're quoting are from Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi in the 50 principles or 50 lessons in the principles of belief, then God and His attributes by Sayyid Mujtaba Lari, followed by Theological Instructions of Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi. So we're going to be using all three of these resources to get the answers that we want. So the first question that we ask is that why do we need to prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or God? The first answer that our ulama give is that it is part of our fitrah, or part of our innate nature or intrinsic nature, to want to become aware of reality. And we call this curiosity, basically, right? That we are created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be curious. We see this curiosity in children. I often find that when we look at children, before they have been influenced by various factors, you see within them the intrinsic qualities that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us with, and curiosity is one of them. Children want to know why. Children want to know answers to these questions. And we see this even in regular life, right? So for example, if you find a person who's in a coma, this is an example given by Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi, that when that person is in a coma, and when they wake up, they want to know realities. They want to know what happened. They want to know what they missed, how long they were out. This curiosity is very natural. Now, as we mature and as we get older, and especially when we are faced with different hardships, that curiosity that we have takes another form altogether. Where we begin to ask ourselves certain questions about what is the purpose of all of this? Why am I going through such difficulties? Or when we look at the world around us today, we see wars and famine and poverty. Questions come to mind that what is the purpose of all of this? Is there someone who's in charge? If this person is in charge, then why don't they do something about these? These are curiosity questions that are innate within us. We are programmed to be curious. And so one of the main reasons of why we want to prove the existence of God is because there is this burning curiosity that we have within us. For us as believers, this is a vital step to our maturity of Iman, where there is this notion sometimes that the fact that I am a Muslim or I'm a believer, that I have already reached the the end line, when really just the fact that I'm a believer puts me at the starting line, and now I have to move forward. And the way we move forward is by being confident and firm and solid in our beliefs. And so curiosity is one of the main reasons why we want to, or we need to, study about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second reason given by our ulama as far as why we need to prove the existence of God is to thank the provider. Shukr al-Mun'im, as it is known. Again, this is maybe an offshoot of the fitrah or the curiosity. But in life, when someone does something for us, if we get a surprise gift, we want to know who it is so that we can thank them. When someone does something nice for us, we want to thank them. In life, we're constantly blessed. There are times when I could have gotten into an accident and something stopped me or something saved me. There's this curiosity or this desire to thank the source of that saving, basically. And this is known as shukr al-mun'im. And of course, as believers, this desire to want to thank the provider would mean that I want to get closer to Allah, get to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala better so that I can thank Him appropriately. The third reason why we want to prove the existence of God would be to defend your beliefs or debate with others. And to be quite frank, this is not important. We don't study about theology so that we can debate about theology with others. There are specialists for that. We study about existence of God, and we study about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala so that we can get closer to God, basically. That would be the main reason why. But generally, as far as why we need to study the existence of God, these are the reasons given by our ulama, and the first one is the most apt, I believe. So the second question, before we get into how to prove the existence of God, are what are the benefits of having faith and what are the benefits of knowing God? So the first thing our ulama say is that it brings about a sense of peace and hope, especially when one is faced with difficulty, knowing that there is a God, or knowing that there was or there is a purpose behind why I'm going through everything. It reduces anxiety and it reduces worries. It brings about a sense of calmness within us, especially when one, for example, suffers, knowing that you will be paid for in full for your patience during that suffering brings about ease in dealing with all those difficulties. So it helps. When you think about it from a very material perspective, the reason why people have a lot of anxiety at times is because they rely on the material only. And when the material doesn't come through for them, they have nothing else to rely on. And so it creates within them anxiety and restlessness. While we realize that the material has been put here for us so that we can get closer to God. So when the material fails, we don't panic, because we know God is there and He'll replace it with something else to get closer to Him. So it brings about a sense of peace and hope. And inshallah, by understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a bit more clearly and a bit more better over the course of these next 2 weeks, we will feel that sense of hope and peace within us. Another reason why there is benefit in studying or knowing God is that it creates within human beings a sense of responsibility, where knowing that there is going to be accountability for our actions causes mankind to become less selfish and more selfless. So I realize that I am a peg within an entire system of pegs in this world, and that my actions actually have an effect on everybody else. And so there is a sense of responsibility that it brings within me, especially knowing that there is going to be accountability in the hereafter. And according to Ayatollah Nasir Makarim Shirazi in the 50 Lessons of Principles of Belief for Youth, that knowing God actually helps with the progress of science. He says the world of creation is like a great book in which every creature forms a word or sentence in that. From the point of view of a person who worships God, every atom of this universe is worthy of study. And therefore, when I have faith I want to know more about my creator, and so I will study and try to get closer to my creator in that line. And we see that translated in different ways too, right? So, for example, if someone's creator is materialism, um, then the aim of materialism will drive them to work hard as well. So we see this in different manifestations or different ways. But for us as believers, everything around me um, shows the signs of God, and so I want to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So having understood these two questions, which serve as preliminary discussions before we move forward, we now come to the main discussion, and that is that how do we prove the existence of God? So we're going to be talking about three ways in which we can prove the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Um, they kind of connect with one another, though in simplicity one could suffice depending on your own position. So the first way that Ayatollah Nasir Makam Shirazi describes in his book, he says that the first way of knowing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the inward way, basically looking inside. And he says this is the closest way because it's within us, the knowledge by presence, basically. And this is what is known as fitri. He says that scholars say that every human being who thinks, from whatever class or race one be, if they are left alone and they receive no special training and they don't hear the words of people who worship God nor the words of materialists, that person will naturally become aware of a force or power which is above nature and which rules all of the world. In other words, there is something beyond me. These are people, he says, who have not been polluted, right? And this call comes in to all of us. This is what Allah says, that even people who are polluted, فَإِذَا رَكِبُوا فِي الْفُلْكِ دَعُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. When they board the ship, they invoke Allah, putting exclusive faith in Him. We see this, Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala describe of Fir'aun as well, right? This Fir'aun who say Ana Rabbukumul A'la, that I am the mighty Lord, or the Most High, the Lord the Most High. When he was drowning, he said Amantu bi Rabbi Musa, that I now believe in the Lord of the world, because at the time of desperation, the inner sound gains strength, right? And I think that this is where most of us can feel that fitri presence, that when I'm going through difficulty, I will say, Ya Allah. That when I'm going through hardships, I will look inside to try to find answers of what is happening. And so sometimes difficulty and disasters and trials are a way to reach out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think some the trials have that purpose, right? So even for us as believers, I often sit and reflect and ask myself that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had not mandated that I pray to Him 5 times a day, I could probably go the whole day without remembering God then, right? And so to not allow that to happen, He has ordained for me to pray. But in the meantime, because I become forgetful, God tries me with things, right? Things that shake me, whether it's something small like my car not starting, or whether it's something big like I lose a job, or a family member dies. But the purpose of these quote unquote trials are to awaken that fitra within us, so that we are constantly in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and reaching out to Him. So the aim would be that that sound that is there within me, I utilize it all the time, and I utilize it to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Before we move on, in his book, he also goes on to discuss something which is really interesting, and he says that he asks the question that whether or not this inner voice that we're talking about is truly innate, or is actually a byproduct of our environment, right? In other words, we hear God discussed all the time, whether it's in parents, whether it's in school, whether it's media. Hence, it is something that is taught and not innate within us, that people will learn this word and then associate something to it. So it's not something that's innate. But he describes, he answers this question by saying that customs change over a course of time. We cannot find a custom that has not changed throughout history. So, for example, food changes, clothing changes, housing changes. Thus, we see that this is something. Um, Sorry, yeah. So he says that when you find a custom that has not changed, like food hasn't changed, so we need it, but the way the type of food has changed. So he's basically saying that when you find a custom that hasn't changed, um, you know that that's not something that is learned, but rather that is something that is innate within all of us. Now, some people may refer to this inner voice or this inner cry or this inner association with different things. Like some may interpret it as idols, for example. Some may interpret it as nature, for example. There is something, but I don't know what that thing is, basically. However, he says with reflection and in the advancement of science, the truth that there is a being above nature becomes apparent. And it's not just nature, there's someone running nature, there's someone in charge of all of these things. And as a result, and so this result of awakening that fitra within us is something that we all need. And sometimes we need a push to awaken our fitra. And this is where we come to the second way that he describes, and that is the outward way, which he says is the clearest way. And this is often known as Burhanun Nadam, the proof based on organization or the proof based on the system. This is known as the clearest way. So the first one was the closest way. This is the clearest way. And in my opinion, you don't need a third way. The third way is a slightly philosophical way. But when if you just take these two ways, it can really be powerful enough to awaken the spirit. And then the third one maybe helps clarify certain answers that come. So he's basically saying that with a quick glance at the world that we live in, we realize that the world is not in chaos and disorder. Rather, all phenomena are in motion, moving towards a clear and determined direction. The facilities of the world are like a great army which has been divided into well-organized units which move in determined directions. Yani everything that we see around us, put aside the actions of man here, but think about the changing of night today, the changing of seasons, the way the sun rises, the way that people are born and people die, the way plants live and plants die and then they come back to life, the way the wind blows and the tide rises. All of these things, though they are separate, but they are well organized units, all moving in determined direction. And so he describes that when a human being pays attention to the world around them, they will see order. And when there is order, they will see intellect in that as well. So the outward way, um, basically says that wherever there is a sense of order, or wherever there is organization, there has to be an organizer. And the larger the system is of organization, the more intellectual being is behind it who is organizing it. This is sometimes known as the clockmaker theory, where they say that if you take a clock and you dismantle the clock, um, and you can wait there for decades and centuries and forever, that clock is not going to come back together. There has to be someone who does it. I can tell my daughter to clean her room, and we can wait till forever. That room's not getting clean unless she goes in there and cleans the room, right? So in the same way, when we look at this beautiful organization around us, it proves without a doubt that there is an organizer. So he says that when we look at, for example, the organization of every creature, that in order to remain and survive, they must be part of a series of laws and special conditions. For example, a tree requires water, good soil and adequate temperature for that tree to grow. And you can take many other examples, but what he's saying is that if these conditions do not exist, there's no possibility of growth. And the fact that the right conditions were chosen proves the necessary preliminaries requires an intellect behind that. It's not just something randomly that took place. Also, he talks about every creature has a special effect that is particular to it, which they constantly flow. For example, fire always burns. Water always has the same effect. Even when we look at um, creatures within a system or an organism, they coordinate with each other. Like you see what's that, like where the animals within this particular system have a hierarchy, or the body in the system that it works in, the food chain, sorry, that I was talking about, or the human body. All of these describe a particular organization and a particular order to them, and this in itself proves that there is an intellect behind it which is organizing it. And so he says that this truth is clear for everyone's conscience, that whenever order exists in a facility, this shows intellect, thought, a plan, and a goal. Thus, wherever there is a sense of order, beside that, there has been an intellect. And however much larger that system be, it is more accurate and more interesting. The knowledge which brings that into being is in the same proportion is greater. And so, it sounds complex, but it's not. Basically, what it's saying is that whenever you look, or wherever you look, you will see the hand of God in it, right? You see, we live here in Canada, like where I live here in Canada, in Toronto. Um, you see the colors of fall, for example, and you see how the leaves become bare in winter, the trees become bare in winter, and how once again they are brought back to life in the spring. It's remarkable that how one cannot focus on these things and see the beauty of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala within them. And so, he says, as Allah says in the Quran, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. Soon we shall show them our signs in the horizons, in the afaq, and in their own souls, and in your own creation. We will show you our signs until it becomes clear to them that He is haq, that He is real. And so these two proofs are the most simplest proofs. The first one is more of an innate proof. The second is more of is more of an outward proof, but again, a very simple proof. And when you add both of these together, when you begin to see the beauty of God, when you begin to see the hand of God, what it does is makes you realize internally that God is truly in control. And if God has organized everything in such a way, then God's going to organize me in such a way and organize my affairs in such a way that I don't have to panic when things go wrong. Rather, I can find a sense of security and a sense of calmness that exists within me that can help me then carry on. So these two ways, the outward way and the inward way, are important proofs. Now, and simple proofs. And I think these are enough, to be quite honest, but we come to a slightly higher proof now, and then this proof carries us on the rest of the way. So we come now to a third proof, which is more of a philosophical or more of an intellectual proof. It's a proof of a necessary existence. Wajib al-wujud. So here, the question comes that, okay, fine, we see things created. Why can't things create on their own? And so you say that, okay, let's say something created something on its own. Who created that thing? And so you say, okay, something else in nature created that thing. And then who created that thing? And something else in nature created that thing. And when we begin to go back this way, we are left with a problem in that how can something which is created and requires creation be created on its own? And we find that then that's an impossibility. And this is where we are then left with an answer that there has to be a creation that does not need or require anything else to bring it into creation. Therefore, it is the starting force for everything to move forward, because nothing comes from nothing, or something does not come from nothing. Something has to start it off. And this is where we now come to the slightly deeper proof. Not the most complicated proof in philosophy, but a solid proof of a necessary existent. So a necessary existent is known in Arabic as wajib al-wujud. Wujud means something which is in existence, and wajib means necessary, right? So a necessary existent is an existent which does not need, require, or depend upon any other existence for coming into being. Yani, I needed my father to come into being. My father needed his father to come into being. His father needed his father to come to a being. And we can go back all the way to Adam, for example, alayhi salam. And what brought Adam into being? Then there had to be a being who is not created to bring every other being into existence, because if it needed creation, then there was something prior to it. I hope that that makes sense, but we're going to now discuss it in great detail. So why is it necessary? The question is asked. This discussion stems from Theological Instructions, the book. Theological Instructions from Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi, which is also, you can PDF it online, Google it, and you'll find it. So why is it necessary for there to be an existent which does not require or depend upon any other existence for coming into being? Why can't we just go back forever and say, okay, um, something created this, something created this? And the answer, I think, is quite clear, right? Because if every existence required another existence for it to come into being, each one of them in turn requiring a cause, because something causes something else to come into existence, then he says that no existence would ever come into being, because an infinite series, or what is known as tasalsul, of causes is impossible, right? What created this, what created that, this, what created that, this, what created, but you can't just continue to go back in this way again, because an infinite series of causes is not possible. It has to originate from somewhere. And therefore, an infinite series of causes is compelled to terminate, yani compelled to start or go back all the way towards an existence which is not a caused thing of any other existence, something which was always there, and something which did not need something else for it to come into existence. And this existence, which is not caused, but rather has always existed, is known as a necessary existence. It's a lot of existences, I understand, right? But I hope that is understood, what is being said here. Now, of course, we have much more to cover in this, but I hope that this part of it is understood so far, that there has to come, these infinite, or these series of causes has to terminate somewhere. And it terminates at something which is not a caused being. Something did not cause it to come. Otherwise, it would again continue, right? And this is known as a necessary existence. So the proof here is given. The answer is given. But now we go into a little bit more detail to further explain this, so that we can get some answers and get some more clarity regarding this. So in the book Theological Instructions, he goes into this discussion on English grammar, or just grammar in general, right? Where he says that in any sentence in English, there are two fundamental parts. There is a subject and there is a predicate. So, for example, in the phrase "the sun is shining," the sun is the subject, while shining is the predicate. A predicate is a part of a sentence which states something about the subject. Okay, so for those maybe not familiar what a subject or a predicate is, but a predicate is something which says something or describes the subject. Okay, so in this again, like in the statement, the sun is shining. This is where we get that understanding that the shining is the predicate because it's describing the sun, and the sun is the subject. Now, the establishment of a predicate for the subject can only have three states. And the way the description is describing the subject can only have one of three possibilities. Either it is impossible, right, for it to happen, or either it is necessary for it to happen, or either it is not necessary or not impossible for it to happen, right? So, for example, if it's impossible, like the number three is greater than the number four, that's an impossibility. That's never going to happen. Or, for example, I would say two is half of four. Well, that's wajib. That's necessary. That happens every single time. Two would always be half of four. Or sometimes things are either not necessary nor are they impossible. Like the sun is above our head. So it's not necessary that the sun should be above my head, but it is possible that the sun could be above my head. So in any situation, the predicate will have one of three possibilities, whether it's impossible for it to be true, whether it's necessary for it to be true, or whether it's not necessary or impossible for it to be true. Now, in philosophy, where only existence is described, therefore things which are impossible for it to be in existence are something that needs to be ignored, right? Because in philosophy, they're not going to spend time addressing issues which are impossible because things are infinite in number of things which are impossible, that when we put minds together, we can come up with a series of lists which are impossible, and then you'd be spending time talking about that which is impossible, which would really be a waste of time. This is why I remember like our teachers would sometimes, and we would ask like questions that probably would never happen, like we would say like, how would you pray on Mars? And so he would say, when you're ready to go to Mars, you let me know and I'll tell you. Because what's the point of talking about it if it's something that's really not going to happen, right? So let's not waste time on that whatsoever. So then we are only left with two things to talk about. Whether something is necessary for it to be in existence, or whether something is neither necessary nor impossible, mumkin, possible, so it's a possible existence, or whether it is a necessary existence. So when we describe these things, right? So a necessary existence we've already described is known as an existence which exists in itself and does not depend upon something else to bring it into existence. So it is independent, it is always existing, and it does not require anything else to bring it into existence. A possible existence, or a mumkin al-wujud, is an existence which does not exist on itself and depends on another existence in order for it to be realized. Now, when we look at a necessary existence and we say that it exists on itself, what that tells us is that it has no beginning or no end, right? Because it's something that is existing on its own. And when something is existing on its own, they are not limited or bound by time, because if something was bound by time, there is an indication that there was an existence prior to that where it was not in existence, or there will come an existence or a time soon when it will not be in existence. So it's something that basically describes something that has no limit in time and that does not have any beginning or an end, while a possible existence is something which is not existent on itself, but rather it depends on something else to bring it into existence. So examples of that are like you and I. You and I are possible existences. This laptop is a possible existence. The internet is a possible existence. Why? Because the non-existence of it at a particular time is an indication that its existence is not from itself. So the fact that this laptop did not exist 10 years ago is an indication that something had to bring it into existence. The fact that I was not alive 40 years ago is an indication that something had to bring me into existence. And this is the main difference between a necessary existence and a possible existence, and why a necessary existence cannot be limited by time. Otherwise, it would be an indication that something had to bring it into existence. So I hope that those two differences are very clear, because that's how we're going to move forward. So when we look at existences through intellectual perception, they're conceptualized in one of three ways. Okay, so when we're only looking at necessary and only looking at possible. So when we're looking at these two forms of existences, then we are left with three possibilities. One is that every existence is then necessary, or every existence is a possible existence. And third would be that some existences are necessary existences and some are possible existences. Okay? Because there is no other choice, right? We're not talking about impossibilities. So I'll take your questions in the end. Yeah, so we'll save the question. I'll make sure that there's enough time and we can have a discussion, and then you can ask all your questions at that time. And maybe I won't have the answers for them. I don't know. So therefore, when we talk about intellectual perception, can be conceptualized in these three possibilities. I think we understand that, right? So when we say that there are only two forms of existences, then these two forms of existence can only exist in one of these three ways. Either they're all necessary, or they're all possible, or that some are necessary and that some are possible. So let's discuss these three. So the first one is that number one is impossible. It is impossible for every existence to be a necessary existence. Why? Because we see this clearly, right? For this statement to be true, and as we have understood the definition of a necessary existence, it would mean that every existence that we see around us is independent and nothing caused it to come into existence. Well, we clearly know that that's not true. This laptop needed someone to come into existence. I was not alive before, and therefore I needed something to come to existence. And therefore we see very clearly that number one, or all existences are necessary, is impossible. So then we come to the second one, where all existences are possible. Now, again, because we have understood the definition of mumkin al-wujud, or possible existences, where they do not exist on their own and they require something to bring it into existence. In other words, what it means is that they all require a cause for their existence, or an illah for their existence, because nothing came on its own and they needed something to bring it into existence, right? So the way we disprove this is in one of two ways. So the impossibility of number two, where every existence is a possible existence, can be disproven through two means. Number one is that if all existences were possible existences, this would mean each one of them requires a cause for its existence. And this would lead to an infinite regression of causes. This is what we talked about in the very beginning, or what is known as tasalsul, which is impossible, right? So let's say F was caused by E, and E was caused by D, and D was caused by C, and C was caused by B. If B is also a possible existence, it would mean that it would require a cause for it to come into existence. And then we would continue going backwards and say, well, then A did it. Well, if A is also possible, then A also needs a cause, and then A also needs a cause, and then minus A needs a cause, and minus B needs a cause. And we can't go back forever into a series of regression of causes because it is impossible. Nothing comes from, something does not come from nothing. And so there has to then go back to a time or a place where there was an original cause which brought it into existence. So the proof here is the proof of tasalsul, is mahal, is impossible for it to be true. Now, what if someone says then, okay, what if we said that A caused B, and B caused C, and C was caused by A? This is known as a vicious circle, right? So if we had a diagram where A goes to B like a circle, and B goes to C, and C goes back to A, and we say that this is the way existence works, that everything was created in this way, this would be an impossibility as well, because it would mean that A would have to be an existent and a non-existent at the same time, or a necessary and a possible at the same time, and two diametrically opposed characteristics cannot exist together. And so with these proofs, what we are saying is that we do need a necessary existence to bring about this series of causes, and so it is impossible for all existences to be possible. It is impossible for all existences to be mumkin, right? Maybe that becomes easier to be, or more palatable to understand. So if we have disproven one and we have disproven two, then we are left now with only number three, and that is that some existences are necessary and some are possible, right? And this is where I'm going to pause for today, where we have about 15 minutes left or so that I want to take for questions, and we'll continue with this next week, inshallah. So we have reached a place now in our discussion, especially in this third proof, where we are saying that some existences are necessary and some are possible, which is a great place to be at. Though there's a problem with this, though, in that we have not proven that there can only be one necessary existence. So if we were to take this necessary existence to be God, then right now we have not proven the oneness of God. Rather, we have left the possibility open for there to be multiple necessary existences. So the next stage is that after we have agreed that there has to be a cause which is not dependent upon any other causes, we have come a huge step in identifying that there has to be philosophically something which has always existed and does not need something else to come into existence. However, what we have not proven is that that necessary existence can only be something which is singular or one. And inshallah, next week, the plan is to then describe or discuss why there cannot be more than one God, or more than one necessary existence. And then what Ayatollah Misbah Yazdi does in Theological Instructions, he says that then we cannot, even if we have proven that there can only be one necessary existence, we have not proven yet that that necessary existence is God, because someone can call that necessary existence as material, as matter, as nature, whatever they want to call it. And so after we have proven that there can only be one necessary existence, we now have to describe it. And once we begin to describe it, we understand very clearly why it cannot be matter, why it cannot be. So we begin to give the sifat and the attributes of this, and then we conclude with a slightly philosophical discussion about what does it mean when God has attributes, and how is that understood in our minds. So inshallah, we're going to stop here. So I hope that it's dense, and I think that the slides will be available for you to go back, and maybe you're taking notes. But it's fun dense. It tickles the mind. And when the mind is tickled, you will reflect about it, and Allah will make it clearer for you. So we'll see if you have any questions now, so that we can answer them. So the chat room is open, and inshallah, I will try to answer them. So one of the questions we got was, how do we prove that God exists even today, and that He did not create the world and vanish? So that's a good question. I believe that that question will be answered next week when we begin to then describe the attributes of God. However, as we for a simple answer is that if we understand that we are possible existences, then the possible existence is not only dependent upon the necessary existence at its onset, but that possible existences are dependent upon the necessary existences always. And if the necessary existence would cease to be there, then the possible existences would cease to be there as well. For a really simple example, would be like this laptop, and all the parts of the laptop are dependent on each other, but more so I am dependent upon the manufacturer to have done his job correctly. And so my link to the manufacturer is always there, but when the manufacturer, for example, does not do that job completely, this laptop, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but 5 months from now will break. So I'm always in need of that, or that of that creator to have done its job correctly. That's a very simplistic understanding, but when we understand it from the grand scheme of things, we find that possible existences are not only dependent upon the necessary at the time of creation, but they're always dependent upon that. So I hope that that answers the question. You're welcome. Anybody else have any questions? We'll give it a couple more minutes. I feel that if we had continued any more today, it would have gotten too dense, to be quite honest. But so the three books that we're discussing are 50 lessons on the principles. I'm just typing them out for you so you have them. Of Belief by Ayatollah Nasser Makarim Shirazi. I agree, it is too much to digest, but it's fun. I always enjoy this subject very much, and I try to study it myself at least once a year, if not more than once a year, because I feel that when I study it like this, it strengthens my belief in Him. The second book is God and His Attributes by Sayyid Mustafa Lari. And the third is Theological Instructions by Ayatollah Misbah ESD. This third book's translation is not that great. The other two books' translations are quite good, especially God and His Attributes is good. And all three of these books are available online, so you can Google it and study it if you're interested. Otherwise, just take what's given here, inshallah. We'll wait one more minute if there's any questions. Right, so I think we'll just end here then. وآخر دعوان أن الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.